And then I'm going to introduce Pam by saying that Pam is a dementia care consultant. She is a speaker and an author, especially on the topic of dementia care. As a dementia caregiving coach and guide, Pam Ostrowski provides a path to help relieve fear, anxiety, confusion that family members often experience when a loved one is diagnosed with any form of dementia. Pam is the founder of Alzheimer's Family Consulting. She's a national speaker, and she has a certification in Senior Advisor, that's a CSA certification, Certified Dementia Practitioner, that's the CDP certification, and she is certified in dementia care, that's the CDC certification. Pam is also the author of the highly rated Alzheimer's guidebook, It's Not That Simple, Helping Families Navigate the Alzheimer's Journey, which is based on Pam's 14-year dementia and Alzheimer's journey with her own parents. With that, I have nothing further to introduce. I've got everybody on mute coming into the room, and if you want to try to keep yourselves on mute during the course of the time that you're here, that'll be great. Since we have a small group, if there's time and opportunity, we will be able to unmute and ask questions at the end. With that, Pam, take it away.
All right, wonderful. And thank you so much, Ron. And thank you to AARP for hosting me as a volunteer with the Alzheimer's Association. This is an opportunity for us to ask questions, to get familiar, or some of this stuff may already sound familiar, with the symptoms and the responses. So today's conversation is about dementia conversations. As a words person, I believe that the biggest issues that we have in communicating with someone with dementia is directly related to the word choice that we have and that we use, and that we trigger people. I told you that already. I've done that, I told you that 10 times. And so we get frustrated. And so I want to talk, in addition to the slides that I'm going to show you, I want to address any questions you have. I know that Ron and Mayan will be looking at the questions, and we'll have the opportunity to interrupt me if there's a timely question. Otherwise, we'll definitely wait until the end. So let me go ahead and get started with the presentation. However, I am who I am. My mom had 14 years. We had a 14-year journey with her with Alzheimer's. She started out with dementia. And then 6 years in is when we actually got the Alzheimer's diagnosis. And she lived another 8 years. However, her journey and everyone's journey is very unique. So just because I share a story with you about my mom, that doesn't mean that's going to happen with your loved one. And that's really important to realize, is that if we give you some advice on how to have a conversation and it doesn't work, then there's other ways, other conversations, other word combinations, other timings that we can modify those different criteria so that they do work, and so that you have peace of mind and a good quality of life, and so does your loved one. And that is the ultimate goal. So let's get started. All right. So again, the conversation is really about dementia conversations, oddly enough. So we broke this down into 3 categories, whether it's the 3 main or most difficult conversations. Honestly, I would say there's probably a dozen of them, but you don't know that going in, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to cover the ones that we hear most from you, our caregivers. The first one is, my loved one doesn't want to go to the doctor. They don't want to be diagnosed. They don't want to know. And honestly, if you think about it, would you want to know? So sometimes we're afraid. All of this comes from fear, by the way. And so it's so important to have these conversations with kindness and compassion and empathy, because it's way too easy for us to jump in and treat this person as if their brain function is normal, and it's not. And so we're like, why, you didn't used to be like this. And we need to work with dementia care coaches to help us understand and come from a different place than we're used to coming from. That's how you have successful conversations with someone with dementia, because I'm sure you've heard, you'll never win an argument with someone with dementia, because they'll just get angry and frustrated. You'll get angry and frustrated, and everybody will throw up their hands. And if that happens enough, it kind of damages the relationship. So we want you to have the best conversations possible. The next conversation that everybody asks about, I mean, everybody asks about this one. How do we basically help them understand that driving is no longer for them? And notice I didn't say take the keys away from them, because even putting those words in a paragraph or in a phrase means I'm taking something away from you. And it turns out that keys in general have a very deep association with independence. Let them keep their keys. Just get rid of the thing that they plug into. Okay. So we're going to talk a bit about that and how you talk about driving. There's some recommendations the Alzheimer's Association has, and then I'll tell you what, I tried everything, but the words that I chose for my dad worked. And he is a retired lieutenant colonel. So you want to talk about somebody who's really independent and drove all of his life. It was a challenge. Let's just say that. And so I'm going to share a little bit of my personal experience with that. And my dad also had vascular dementia towards the end of his life. So it was more of that angry, paranoid. He was always upset, and he honestly, with my mom, ending up being in a separate facility or separate community from him, he was really sad that last year or so. And so I think there's a lot of combination of elements that affected his way of communicating. And so we again have to come from a place of compassion, empathy, and kindness. And then the last one, another big one, and we hesitate. We are not a culture that likes to talk about finances and legal responsibilities. But the problem is if you can't start this conversation about finances and legal and healthcare power of attorney and durable power of attorney, the state will take over and they will decide what happens to your loved one, or the hospital will decide what happens to your loved one. And so we need to make sure that wishes are very clear. And so let's get started with the very first one, which is, okay, we need to take you to the doctor. So we're part of this conversation is really about, how do you start the conversation? How long do you have the conversation? How many conversations do you have? And then some helpful resources. So we cover these things to make sure that you have an idea of, yeah, the words are great, but when do I do this? How do I do this? What environment do I do it in? So we want to make sure that you have those tools in place as well. So a lot of times we hear when it comes to caregiving is, it's like, oh, well, my sister lives nearby, she can help with this. Or, when you talk with your parent or your spouse, I'm fine, don't worry about me, I'm good. Because this all comes from a fear of the future. And I first want to say, yes, having cognitive impairment and watching its progression is not the best journey or the chosen journey any of us would have. We want to have, my parents' plan, by the way, was to have complete mental capacity until they died. They would die in their sleep, of course. And Medicare and TRICARE for Life would take care of all of the expenses. It doesn't. And that they would live in their condo that was paid for the rest of their lives. None of that happened. And so we were scrambling. We didn't plan for contingencies or other possibilities. So, and it was painful and expensive. And I don't want you to go through that. So we want to talk about how you have successful conversations. And so, I always say sooner is smarter. And this says sooner is better than later. Our habit, our culture, our society really is crisis reactive. So you'll hear someone say, oh, my aunt fell and, she's in the hospital with a broken hip. Well, did we think about taking up all the flooring and loose flooring like rugs, area rugs, that type of thing? Did we think about the fact that she may need some sort of durable medical device like a cane or a walker of some sort, a wheelie. We have to be proactive. And the reason why we have to be proactive is because any decision made in crisis is going to be expensive. It may not be your first choice. And it can lead to a lot of family dynamic issues. And so none of that stuff sounds good, does it? So we want to make sure that we plan for how to get through this. And honestly, even outside of dementia, we should all have a plan and have contingencies and look at the possibilities. And that's one of the things that I've made my purpose and my passion moving forward after going through this journey with my parents, because honestly, I don't want anybody to have to go through things the way we did. There's just no reason for it now with all the resources that we have today, especially those provided by the Alzheimer's Association. So one of the things that I think is the biggest challenge in having these conversations is that the person, I don't say they're in denial, they're resisting what they're hearing and feeling. And they don't want, none of us do, want to lose our ability to remember how to do day-to-day tasks. We don't want someone helping us shower or toilet or dress. That's the antithesis of who we are as human beings. So there's a huge fear, and that's one of the reasons these conversations are challenging. So instead of maybe reacting too quickly, I told you that 5 times already that we're going to the bank today, and you're not even dressed. Why aren't you dressed? And it might be that they don't even know where their clothes are located. There's so many things. And imagine how that would feel to hear that from someone that loves you or that you love, for them to be yelling at you because you haven't done something that you don't even have a clue what they're talking about and you can't remember. So the best thing to do is to take notes and sit down with your loved one and say, okay, I want to talk to you about some things that I've observed, and I want to see if it makes sense to you. Like, have you noticed this too? And the best approach, in my opinion, is to use questions. Things like, have you noticed this? Do you think that feels okay to you? Do you, and inevitably, depending on where this person is in the different stages of dementia, most likely you're going to notice the earliest stage and the forgetting where things are, forgetting words, or forgetting a task, or asking the same question repeatedly. That's usually the first absolute conversation that we end up having, and that provides probably the most frustration. But to be able to ask questions makes a huge difference in how the person receives the information. If you say you need to, or I've noticed you do this without a question on the end of it, the first thing they're going to do is deny it and say, I don't do that. You don't know what you're talking about. And then they may get up and leave. So that was a really short conversation that didn't go as well as you had planned. So those are because some of the tips of approaching the conversations. And then we recommend at the Alzheimer's Association to practice this in advance. I worked with one client who was very much triggered. He was very much an in-charge type of person and very project management oriented and detail oriented. So he would tell his sisters who lived near his parents, you need to do this. And have you looked into that? And it came across as very condescending. So he and I practiced on how he would have a conversation with them. So grab a sibling or grab a friend and say, I need to practice this, and let me know how it feels. Because ultimately people, no matter what stage they're in Alzheimer's or any other type of dementia, they remember emotions, they remember feelings. So if you make them feel badly, their response to you moving forward is going to be cautious. It's going to maybe be grumpy. They may not want to talk to you for a day, but we don't need any of that. So simply by accepting responsibility for a good conversation and practicing, that's a great way to make sure these conversations go well. And the other thing is everybody needs to be chill. We need to be relaxed when we have this conversation. We don't want to be all wound up. We don't want to talk really quickly, because as we age, our brains shrink and we process information more slowly. Now, this happens over decades, so you don't really notice that your brain is 1/1000, 2/1000. Oh, okay, I get it now. You'll notice yourself in your 50s and even 60s going, did I miss something? And then you think about it a second, and then your brain's like, oh, this is what that means. And so as we progress and get older, we're going to have some of these symptoms. That's normal aging. But when those symptoms become daily issues and they progress, then that's when we need to go to the doctor, which we're going to talk about next. And honestly, I think it's best to go talk with the doctor before you start having some of these conversations, because it's always helpful to have a medical professional to provide some insight to both of you. This is a learning experience when you go to the doctor. However, if you can't get to the doctor because your loved one doesn't want to go, the good news is you don't have to physically necessarily leave your home anymore. Thank you, COVID. We now have telehealth where you could get on a Zoom call like this and have a conversation. The other thing you can do is you can both. There's no reason why an adult son or daughter or a spouse can't sit down and take the mini memory state exam or the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. Both of those are available online. And there's other sites like Brain HQ, and the Alzheimer's Association has some resources too for kind of testing to see, what do you remember? What don't you remember? And be able to kind of capture that and say, okay, we need to probably talk to the doctor about if there's anything we can do. Because in reality, there's at least seven different things that can create dementia-like symptoms. And so going to the doctor is, hey, this is a discovery visit. This is the way to figure out where we're at. And I always call it a benchmark visit, where we see, okay, we're gonna run an MRI and see what your brain activity is. We're going to have a conversation. Maybe we'll answer some questions, which would be the exams, and see, where we're at. And honestly, anybody 50 or over should be taking the MIMSA or the MOCA, either one of those two exams, because we all need a benchmark. There's absolutely nothing wrong with a benchmark. You get your blood tested. Why not get your brain tested? So here's the deal with going to the doctor. Honestly, the person is scared. And honestly, you may be too. Angry that you would think that there's something wrong with their brain. And again, this has to do with the stigma associated with a cognitive impairment. So that's why I always say, use that concept of it's time to get our blood tested and our brain tested. And you can do it every single year. There's no reason why you shouldn't. It's covered. It's covered by Medicare. So now the biggest thing is, diagnosis, checkups, and, getting assistance where applicable. And ultimately, my clients always ask me, well, why would I want to know if my loved one had Alzheimer's? And I said, well, it sets up a timeline. So my mom's had dementia-like symptoms for 6 years. And once she got to a point where she couldn't follow instructions, we knew we were in trouble, my dad and I. And so I had to have the conversation about moving to a senior living community. That's not even on this list. So, and that's a whole other topic, but being able to go to the doctor and it was emotionally challenging. I will say that to you, because watching someone you love struggle when you love them so much and you don't want them to struggle can be difficult. I want you to emotionally prepare for that as the person going with them. They should never take a test or an exam or go through this without someone with them whom they love. So they should never be in a doctor's appointment by themselves, because you just don't know what they're going to say. And it may represent the truth or it may not. And we tend to lean towards the may not. So Donna here is someone who is going to share a bit with the importance of going to the doctor and how to have that
I think
conversation.
you have to be honest. I think that's the important thing with it. To get a loved one to the doctor, I think you just need to be candid and honest of what are you trying to do. We're trying to understand what we're up against. It's just so important to do that, because you can't battle something that you don't know what you're battling. Again, it may not have been Alzheimer's, it could have been depression, it could have been so many other things. And guess what? There's other things you can do to take care of those issues as well. But that's what you need to be able to do. You can't ignore something. It's not going to go away.
So to that point, we don't know what the problem is. And you may assume, as the person who lives with them or the adult child, you go and see them, at Thanksgiving. Oh my gosh, mom's memory is terrible. Well, you know what? You're not a physician. You don't administer the mini memory state exam or the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. You're not trained. You're not certified. You're making an assumption that there's been a change. That's what your observation is, that there's been a change in, we'll say, moms, because 66% of those diagnosed with Alzheimer's are women, by the way. And so we'll say that mom is changed a bit. And so we want to make sure that the factors that influence how your brain functions are things like diet. Has she been eating a lot of sugar? Has she been eating clean, making sure that she's getting enough vegetables and fruits and protein? Is she hydrated? So hydration can have a huge effect on your brain. And that's when you feel blurry, kind of like foggy and can't really find the right word or whatever. Have a glass of water. I mean, like 8 ounces, because when you're dehydrated, your brain collapses in on itself, and that creates that brain fog and that inability to access pieces of your brain. Your brain needs to be hydrated. Exercise. So anything that gets blood pumping to the brain, specifically with exercise, it's oxygenated, highly oxygenated blood to your brain is going to help your brain health, make your brain cells really happy. And, you'll notice that change. So if you have a loved one who sits around and watches TV all the time, that's not good, right? We need to make sure that individual goes out and gets exercise. And I have worked with clients who have asked me, well, how do you get dad to go on a walk? And we've worked through the conversation of how to get him to do that. So again, there's more than just these 3 conversations that you'll be having. So we want to make sure too that, so that's exercise, clean eating, hydration, stress, lowering stress levels, making sure that the person doesn't feel like they're concerned about their finances. They may not be able to balance their checkbook. They may be struggling with that type of activity, or having a conversation with the phone company about their internet. I'm just using that as an example because I'm living that dream. So, maybe if they're struggling a little bit, making sure that they don't feel stressed as much as possible is also a good thing. Sleep is really important. So we shouldn't be sleeping during the day. You can take a quick nap, like a 20-minute nap. We call those power naps. But you instead need to be sleeping mostly at night, 7 to 9 hours. And the reason is that your brain is actually doing its trash compacting and processing its toxins, that everything that crosses over that blood-brain barrier, it's putting it back into the bloodstream to be flushed. So if you don't sleep enough, guess what? You get to keep some of the toxins in your brain. So sleeping is really important. If you're having trouble sleeping, if your loved one's having trouble sleeping, that's a big reason why they might be having or showing dementia symptoms. So pay attention to that. So those are the kind of things that we need to be thinking about first when we go to the doctor. This isn't necessarily dementia. We want to find out what it is. And that's the conversation you can have with them. Not, we're going to a neurologist and getting you an MRI because I think you have Alzheimer's. Yeah, you don't know that. I just want to make sure Okay. They want to make sure that my internet's working. So what we want to do is use the words that are most comfortable for them. And that's, that's going to be a little difficult with going to the doctors. And my dad and mom used to have the same doctor's appointment. So they would book them either back to back or potentially at the same time because they'd be in the same room. And so the doctor would, excuse me, be able to talk with one about in front of the other so that they would have shared information and have the same experience with the doctor. So that's a really interesting thing. And you can see that's the advantage of the telehealth call, is that you can both be there. You can have the whole family there, frankly, if you do telehealth. Now, with Medicare, you do get a free health and wellness visit. Just say that's what you're going to go do. There's no reason to overshare. Oh, I have so many clients who overshare. So we're going to go to the neurologist and then we're going to go to the hospital and get an MRI because we think that, and they just head off in this direction. It's like, wait. Let's keep it simple. That phrase has paid off in everyone's lives, all of our lives. Keep it simple. We're just going for an annual wellness exam where we can voice our concerns with the doctor and see if there's, any serious issues or what we can do to keep our health as good as it is right now. Now, if you have somebody at mid-stage, usually by mid-stage, you're looking at someone in the memory care community or having in-home care to care for them. So I try to avoid doctor's appointments actually, unless it's a real big medical issue, because it's hard for them. They don't want to leave. It's hard for you because they don't want to leave. So being able to, if you need to get out and go to the doctor, pair something fun with it. So my dad, being as smart as he was, would say, we can go to McDonald's and get an ice cream cone afterwards. And my mom loved ice cream. So, she'd be like, okay, fine. And so off they would go. And so if that person likes to go have picnics or likes to go to a movie, you just say, well, first we have to go to the doctor and do a wellness check. And then we're going to go have ice cream. We're going to go out for dinner, or we're going to go to the movies, whatever works for your person. One thing that is also really important is the family needs to have conversation as a family. So one of the worst things you can do is have everybody have separate conversations, because that creates huge family dynamic issues. So I had one person who said, well, I talked to my mom about getting, a healthcare power of attorney and durable power of attorney. And then she went off and told my brother that we'd had that conversation. My brother just called and said, what the heck are you doing? Why are you excluding the rest of the family from this conversation? So you can see where that would create some issues. So, have a group email list, that you send everything out to. Use there's apps out there that are shareable. You can use Google Docs and keep or Google spreadsheet for keeping who's doing what and when conversations have happened, what the conclusions were, all of that kind of thing. But it should be shared amongst all family members that have a vested interest in your loved one's care, whether it's a parent or a spouse. So you don't want to leave people out. And then I don't like this term, but they call Alzheimer's Association calls it a therapeutic fib. I don't think there's any fibbing or lying involved. This is a persuasive technique where you can say, we've got some errands to run, and one of them happens to be the doctor's office. So you're withholding information because the person refuses to cooperate. I'm not a big fan of forcing people to do anything, no matter what their brain condition is. So it's important for us to be generalized if we're going to, help them with a persuasive approach, which I think is probably a better way to put it, because we're not lying, and there's nothing therapeutic about telling somebody that, we're going to go for ice cream and then take a hard right and head to the doctor's office. You lose credibility that way too, especially early stages, because the individual isn't in a situation at this point where they don't remember what you've said. So you can get yourself into a lot of trouble is my whole point. So I'd avoid that strategy if possible, but sometimes when it's serious, we need to find creative ways to persuade someone to do something that they're hesitating to do. And usually there's a reason. So you can, depending on the stage they're at, you can have that conversation with them. Okay, let's move on to driving. So if you guys want to put in the chat, how many of you have had the driving conversation or are about to have the driving conversation? So one of the things that you, as the loved one, as the person who's caring for this individual or cares about this individual, is looking at their car. So I looked at my dad's. I said, Dad, I'm going to take your car and go to the drugstore and get your medication. And he said, okay, here's the keys. And so I did a walk around the car and I'm like, wow, first of all, the tires were almost bald. Secondly, the car kind of hiccuped trying to get it started. So that means it needed a new battery. So maintenance wasn't being done on the vehicle. And then there was this nasty scratch on the bumper. So I talked to him and when I got back and I said, why is there a scratch on the bumper? And he said, some guy hit me in the Walmart parking lot. And I'm like, based on how the damage was done to the bumper, it didn't look like somebody hit him. It looks like it happened the other way. So, but he said, oh, he told me that I hit him and that, for $50, get this, for $50, he'd walk away and not call the insurance company. And I thought, that's a scam. So not only did the poor guy hit someone potentially, but this guy's scamming him now because he's, 88 and still driving. And so that, by the way, I'm going to get back to that in just a second. That was actually the way that I took the car. So traffic tickets, if you happen to be going through and noticing on their bills table where they do bills and stuff, if there's a traffic ticket, again, scrapes on the car, accidents, mistakes while driving, like they get lost or they're late to lunch or dinner with you, or they're turning left when they should be turning right. And this is a very common and regular path that you take and the person doesn't remember it. Stop signs are really hard. As we get older, our peripheral vision closes in. And so being able to pay attention to the traffic, there's a lot going on when we drive, as we know. And the whole concept of distracted driving when using texting or phone calls. So you really, if you're having some cognitive impairment for whatever reason, driving is a pretty scary thing. So that's the symptoms that you need to look at. And again, Chris is going to share with us how, what his approach was.
There's no exact answer on this is when you stop driving. You could tell when coming up to an intersection, as an example, the ability to understand what's going on around you was starting to deteriorate a little bit. Being on the highway with cars on both sides becomes a little bit more difficult. And first and foremost, the safety of everybody in the car as well as other drivers on the road. You think about that and you want to make sure you're not putting anybody in danger. But then the difficult part is telling your dad, who you love, and he loves driving and he's used to it, that he can no longer do that. But then even then, taking the keys away full time was very difficult. The doctor was very helpful in just saying, medically, you can't do this anymore. But my mother had the hardest time with this because she knew how much this was going to hurt him as well. And this is one of the first things that we had to deal with as a family when it came to telling my dad that he had to stop doing something because of this disease. That meant a lot to him.
So I think both men and women are used to their independence and going where they want, when they want. And what happened with my dad is that he was in a grocery store parking lot and he had vascular dementia and he had heart issues, he had moderate congestive heart failure at the time. It moved into severe the last couple of years of his life, and then his brain function really started to suffer. And he fell asleep. He would have problems staying awake during the day because his heart wasn't pumping properly and he wasn't getting enough oxygen. And when you don't get enough oxygen, you get sleepy. So he fell asleep in the parking lot for hours. And so I got a phone call from the community because he was still in assisted living. He was qualified as assisted living. And so he was allowed to come and go as he pleased. And they said, you know, he checked out 2 hours ago and he usually doesn't go anywhere for 2 hours. Can you come over? I'm going to call the sheriff's posse that they have that in Surprise, Arizona. And we're going to make sure that we're going to go look for him. So, of course, my heart's in my throat because I'm like, you know, what's happened to him? Because this is not characteristic of who he is. And so then apparently the story goes, he woke up and he drove back to the community, but he pulled into the receiving dock driveway instead of the carport parkway, the driveway. So he was in the wrong spot. So his car was still missing, right? And he wasn't really visible. And so the caregivers went out and searched the property, and an ex-Navy guy saw the car and saw him, and he'd gone back to sleep. And this is heartbreaking. And so he came up to kind of like rock the car a little bit to try to wake him up so he wouldn't scare him, you know, knock on the window or something. And he's like, Colonel, so form of respect, Colonel, you know, we're having some problems with the driveway. We'd like you to move around and park the car over there. He did not say, what are you doing here? He did not say, you're in the wrong spot. He took on the responsibility and saying, we need some space here and we'd like it. Would you be okay with moving the car around to the carport side? And my dad's like, oh, sure, I can do that. And he did. And then I sat down with him, and I like the way we've put this, when to stop driving, because it's not about taking away the keys, as I mentioned earlier. It's about no longer being on the road. And so rather than trying to focus on what you're losing, I told Dad, look, you know, you fell asleep in the grocery store parking lot. What if somebody had broken in, pulled you out of that car and taken your car? His car was his comfort zone. He drove all of his life for his career. And so it was really difficult. And I said, it wasn't, you know, a lot of people say, oh, you could hurt somebody, you know, but that's other people's safety. And I have to say, psychologically, we, especially people with cognitive impairment, can't really relate to other people very well. So if you say, well, you know, what if there was a kid crossing the street and you didn't put it on the brakes? That's like, yeah, that's never going to happen. You know, what if you hit somebody, you know, you're going too fast and you can't apply the brake fast enough? And my dad would say, I have driven over 1 million miles in my lifetime. That has never happened. So, you know, he's poking holes in that logic. But one of the holes that he couldn't poke a hole into, the logic he couldn't poke a hole into, was, Dad, what if somebody were to hurt you? What if your safety is at risk? Let's say you get a flat tire because they're bald, and you're on the busy road that you have to take to the grocery store. First of all, you could open the door and someone could take the door off and your leg off. I mean, you know, it's a busy street and they may not see you. Secondly, what if somebody decides, hey, there's a guy using a cane for stability and he's going to change a tire? Would the Good Samaritan come by? What if it's not a Good Samaritan? You know, and I said, I don't mean to scare you, but in reality, you are extremely vulnerable with your body condition at this age. And I'm scared that something bad will happen to you, and Mom and I need you. Do you see how different that is than taking away the keys? It's about, I need you to be healthy and safe. And so not driving is going to be the only way that I will feel like you're safe. And then his next question was, how am I going to get raspberries then? And I said, Dad, if you want raspberries every single day, I will drive from my house to the grocery store and then back over to here and drop off raspberries. And he's like, well, what about this? And what about that? And how will I do this? And so I answered all of his questions. And I said, we're not taking the car away. We could still use the car. I said, but you're not going to be driving it. And he was okay with that. So think about your loved one and what's specific to them. And, you know, he certainly wasn't going to drive with mom in the car, because that then I would have probably been really upset. But I focused on their safety, on his safety. So the key here is when you see someone, your loved one, driving poorly, you need to start planning on this conversation and get some coaching if you want. Work with somebody, you know, either a dementia care coach, or work with a friend or a neighbor and say, I got to practice this conversation. Or, you know, have the dementia care coach facilitate the conversation. And again, you're articulating, you know, what changes you've noticed, and their responsibility. And it's either their concern for others, which I believe if you have cognitive impairment, you have a harder time relating to that. I think saying, look, I'm scared for you. I want you to be around longer, and I want you to stay healthy, and I don't want to visit you in a hospital. And I don't know what's going to happen out there with you, you know, being out on the road. You don't even have to call it driving, because that's the other thing is if we use alternate words. So driving is associated with independence. If you say stay off the road, then the brain doesn't trigger immediately to independence. Now they may jump to that conclusion, but you can say, look, you know, you're still going to be able to interact, and we're still going to get you things that you need. We're still going to go visit people. You're not going to be isolated, which is the other reason why people don't want to give up driving, is because if they're social and they want to go out and, you know, say my mom wanted to go out with friends for lunch, now she has to depend on somebody else to drive. Now, the good news is we have services where it's like Uber and Lyft and other things that can help. Okay. Sheila is going to talk about how she addressed the issue of driving.
Some tips on having the conversation is pointing out, especially for my father, the potential danger to others that it may cause if he's behind the wheel. And, you know, just talking about it from the standpoint that this is not only the best thing for you, but this is also the best thing for others around you.
Uh-oh.
And these are some of the alternatives, making sure that, you know, this is what's going to happen, having a plan. You know, if mom can't take you, then Uncle Thomas or some, you know, will be here to take you, and we will make sure that you're getting out of the house and that you're doing some things. So, you know, presenting the bad news, but then also presenting the plan. And for my father, that's really, really important to have a plan.
And that is exactly what you have to focus on. And the reason why she froze is because I hit a button and that paused the video. It wasn't your video connection. It wasn't even my video connection. So here are some tips to help with the conversation. Again, you're talking about the plan and providing alternate transportation, because that is also part of the independence factor. When you think about the logic, which I was still able to have that logical conversation with my dad, it wasn't the car that provided the independence. What does independence mean? And that's a great question to ask your loved one. What does independence mean to you? Well, it means that I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. Okay, well, we're just finding a different way to do that. It doesn't involve driving a car. And honestly, people in New York City do it all the time. Anybody in a big city, most of them don't have cars. So let's just pretend we're in New York City. And lastly, you can ask, if you really have a struggle, you can ask the doctor. So this is the way you would do this, is you call the doctor and say, look, we're coming in. I need your help in talking about no longer being on the road, no longer driving the car. And the doctors are starting to get used to this conversation. So they can help you with that. Right. So it's really, it has to come from a place of professional. Sometimes they have to hear it from a professional, from a doctor. And also feel like people empathize with the situation that they're in, because a lot of it comes from fear. Now Wendy's going to talk about empathy in this conversation.
Talking to somebody about stopping driving, I think it's most important to understand that that is tied to someone's independence more than most things. And so by saying you can't do this anymore is like telling the person, it's like ripping away their independence. And that doesn't feel good for anybody. I know that I've always tried to put myself in that situation. What would I think if someone was saying this to me? You don't get to do this anymore. And how would I feel? And how would I want somebody to talk to me about this? And so if you try to I think sometimes too many people try to approach it as, very punitive. And I'm doing what's right for you. So why don't you understand, without really turning the tables and putting themselves in that position, understanding, how helpless that feels to take those things away. It's important to be thoughtful about what that experience is like for the individual.
Yes. And so ultimately, it's about defining what independence means, because as soon as you start talking about the car, please never say, we're going to take away the keys. You're taking away the car. They can keep the keys. And as people progress in Alzheimer's in particular, by mid-stage, like my dad kept his wallet until he passed away, 93 and a half years old. He had a wallet in his back pocket and there wasn't anything in it, really, just a few things. But it was the comfort of, all of his life he had a wallet. Why would you take that away from him? And so helping, having keys is fine, as long as you don't have the thing that they plug into. So the other thing is understanding their definition of independence. Again, ask them, well, what does independence mean? And maybe go around the table. Don't make it like 5 family members against your loved one. All right. That's piling on. But instead, whether it's at Thanksgiving, although there's usually some dynamics there just because it's Thanksgiving. But if you were, having a family call, I know a friend of mine who does a family call once a month, and, everybody goes around and weighs in and, does their thing. And one of the things would be, well, what's your definition of independence? Like living independently, what does that look like? And everybody gets to voice. And you know what? It's a great conversation. And then, what would be in your life, what would be important? And usually you're going to hear that independence is about being able to do what you want when you want to do it. Not necessarily the how. The how isn't as important. So pay attention to how your loved one responds to that question. And then, obviously, having a plan and figuring out, how this is all going to work. And if you have siblings who can help out, that's a great conversation to have with them as well. And as well as if both parents are alive, whether you're like my mom, even though she later ended up with Alzheimer's, my mom didn't like driving. So she was not plan B if dad didn't drive. So that's something else to think about, is asking who wants to do this, who wants to, how do we share this responsibility? So usually, just a heads up, it can fall to friends, neighbors, or family members. All right. Please incorporate friends and neighbors into your support plan, because they're the ones who see your loved ones the most, and they can help out, and they want to be supportive of someone they care about. So let them do that. Don't keep it all in. All right, let's see what we have to say. So Chris is going to weigh in on the legal and financial conversations. These are particularly sensitive because we as a society don't talk about money. Cultures don't talk about money. It doesn't even have to be in America, like in Latin American countries, as well as in Eastern European countries. That's none of the kids' business. Well, here's the catch. Something bad happens, or something happens at all, you at least need to know where the documents are. You don't necessarily need to know what's in them. And we're not talking about a will where you're naming people and what they get. All right, let's step that aside. We're talking about taking over financial responsibility if your loved one is in the hospital and can't write checks, or you need to pay for rehab expenses. You need to know where the checkbook is. So location is the easier conversation to have than tell me what it is that you want in these. But these conversations need to be had with an estate attorney. And whether they have them with the family member and present, which I advise, or not. So let's hear what Chris has to say.
Financially, this disease will increase the cost of living. It's just a fact. So planning for those extra costs is that much more important than what you were planning for before. And so you have to review everything that's in place, see what changes need to be made, both legally and financially, and you have to monitor that going forward afterwards too.
So additional expenses, what we're talking about really is care, right? Because especially if you have both parents alive, my dad didn't want a stranger in the house, and home care was not an option. So living in a community was better because they still had their independence. They could get up when they wanted to, go to bed when they wanted to, watch TV, not have someone coming in and out of their apartment. So he was more accepting of that. But, you know, living in, and I don't know how many of you have looked at this, but it's really important to look at the expenses of moving into a community. So if you're independent, you know, I am always a fan of sooner or smarter, but with independent living, it's less expensive because there's less services. Assisted living, more expensive. And then if it comes to needing memory care, where the person needs assistance. So my mom lost her ability to speak 8 years before she passed. She lost her ability to walk 5 years before she passed. She lost her ability to follow instructions about 6, 7 years into this journey. So after she was diagnosed. And so she couldn't, if you told her, you know, brush your teeth, she would not know what that meant. She couldn't process that information. But she was still in there. So if you tried to do it wrong, she would correct you. But she couldn't speak. She couldn't process incoming messages to a point where she could react. And that's unique to her. So don't everybody panic. But this is about her situation, and she needed full-on care. And that cost us at the time, let's just talk about today, that would cost you, depending on where you are in the country, you know, $7,000, $8,000, $10,000 a month. Okay, so that's a lot of money. And so what's the plan to address that? And those are the kind of conversations that we need to have and I have the best luck, if you will, in having and I facilitate those conversations to talk about, you know, well, let's talk about later in life planning. We're not talking about right now. Most likely we are probably talking about sooner than later, but we're going to start this conversation now. And sometimes it's hard on us as the caregiver, as the person who is responsible, that we're reluctant. It's uncomfortable. It's not a conversation that, you know, you might have been brought up that it's none of your business what we do with our money. And it's like, yeah, but here's the catch. I'm the one that is going to get the phone call if something happens. And so I need to understand this. And you might do this in a progression, as I mentioned, say, you guys go to the estate attorney and get this stuff straightened out. And then just tell me where stuff is. And then I will at least feel better about knowing where the checkbook is, the fact that my name is on a legal document that gives me authority to write the check and sign the check, you know, those kinds of things. And honestly, in the US, we're pretty money ignorant, and legally for who has rights over our money and our decisions as individuals for the healthcare that we receive, you know, this stuff all has to be in writing. So let's hear what Julie has to say about this.
Here's what I've come to after all of this. That it's the most loving and kind thing you can do for them is to be honest with them and say, this is like a really scary thing. And I feel a lot of discomfort bringing this up to you, but you know, I tell them, if you're going to be the one who's going to take them on this journey, then you have to tell them, I'm going to be here on this journey with you. And there are things that we have to do to get this in place. We're going to go on this journey together. I've told you I'm going to be here with you till the end. So let's get this ready. It's like we're going to go on an ocean ship. We've got to get things packed up. We've got to figure out what we're taking with us. We got to get ready. And the things that we have to get ready, we have to make sure that we know which doctors you're going to be using. I need to get this signed, okay? So that if you go in there and they have to do surgery, for example, I got to have this durable power of attorney for health care for you. I have to have this worked out, okay? Now, if for some reason, okay, you need to go to rehab after something, I have to have these documents here, the financial stuff, so I can get these things taken care of for you while this is going on. I don't want to have anything get in the way of us being able to progress and keep doing this. I said, it seems hard because it's hard in our heads. You know, everybody's heard, read about people who've stolen from elderly people, who've done these horrible things. But if you're the person who's approaching this with loving kindness and compassion, and you're willing to take this person on this journey, you're not doing a bad thing. You're doing the right thing by talking to them about it. And you approach it from the standpoint of, I'm here for you. I'm doing this for you. We're going to do this together. And I'm going to help you through this. And these are the tools that I need to make sure that we can do this.
And that's a really good point, is that it's a matter of, you can take this journey alone, which I don't want you to do. I'm not comfortable with that. I want to be part of this. I love you. Those are the words that people tend to forget to say in these conversations, which is a little bit heartbreaking, is that because they're serious, we forget to say, look, I love you more than anything. And I need to talk to you about some things that are concerning me. Make it about you, not about them. And they're concerning me and what I'm worried about and what keeps me up at night. Would you be okay with having that conversation? Get their buy-in. And then you're going to say, okay, so I was reading in the AARP magazine that did you know that if I'm not on your banking accounts, that I can't write a check unless I have this document called a durable power of attorney or financial power of attorney? And find out whether they even knew that. Don't assume. And then they can say, well, no, I didn't know that. What is it? And then you can go online and get a template and show it to them and say, basically, it just says that you're appointing me with authority if needed, not by default. I can't go in there and do just whatever I want while you're still healthy and walking around. It's only if you can't do it do I step in. And otherwise, all of your finances, all the money you've saved will be locked away and no one will have access to it to help you. That's not a good thing. So basically, what he just brought up is that you want to show that you're in this together, that you're building that plan together. And honestly, I tell some people, depending on how, like my family was very comfortable talking about money and planning. When I was 16 years old, I was going to the military base with my parents to hear TRICARE for Life presentations. Boy, that was boring. Especially for a 16-year-old, but it was interesting in that, you know, my parents they knew I was the youngest. The responsibility was most likely going to fall to me. It did. And so they wanted to get me educated sooner. And I'm like, Dad, just put this in a file cabinet. I'll find it. I don't need to be here, but they wanted me there. So this comes down to, you know, maybe printing off an example of a financial power of attorney and a durable power of attorney. Healthcare power of attorney, sorry. And with the healthcare power of attorney, what that typically says is if I'm incapacitated, only then, if I am incapacitated, can this individual make healthcare decisions for me? So that could be like here's a great example. My mom was going in for her first colonoscopy at 83. And they found cancer. So here we are in the hospital trying to figure out, she'd already started to show signs of dementia. She's about 6 years in, and it started around 77. And the doctor's like, well, we already knocked her out, so we should probably do the surgery now. And the first thing the administration desk said is, where's the healthcare power of attorney? And I'm like, it's back at home. We didn't think we were going to need it. And she's like, you need to go get it. So I went back, got the healthcare power of attorney, because dad was first, and spouses usually, have the first authoritative role. However, some hospitals will say it's not in writing, we're not doing it. And so we presented that. I was secondary, so I had access to the information. If my name weren't on the healthcare power of attorney, I always say put 2 names on there. First person may be incapacitated, may be unwilling, maybe in a different country, who knows? But you should have a secondary. They call it a backup plan for a reason. You need to have primary and secondary names on there. And this way, we were both able to have a conversation with the doctor about next steps and proceed forward with the surgery. So being able to start having conversations, and please feel free to use my examples. Listen to stories from your friends and say, so-and-so was just telling me about X, Y, and Z that happened to his aunt or parent. And I don't want that. I don't want to be in that situation. Do you? And ultimately they're going to say, no, I don't want to be in that situation either. So let's make it easy by documenting everything. These are plans that are, important across all states. So it's something that everyone should have by age 50 anyway. So if these aren't in place, and there's only like 35% of Americans have these documents in place. Now, again, we're not talking about wills and trusts. We're talking about who's going to help you out when you can't help yourself. Kind of a big deal, guys, kind of a big deal. So I've had both of those documents since I was 26. So it's never too young. Again, my favorite phrase, sooner is smarter. And the big thing about all these conversations, I think this should be the overarching umbrella advice, is don't do this all at once. It's exhausting, or can be exhausting. Start dropping hints, start talking about one thing. Don't confuse them with durable financial power of attorney and healthcare power of attorney. Within healthcare power of attorney, usually most states attach an advanced directive. And the advanced directive is where you articulate in writing by initialing what you want to have happen. So my parents were asked, well, how long would you want to be kept alive if you were needing a respirator or you were in a coma? And, my mom, who had dementia at the time, turned to my dad and said, what do you think? How long did you put down? And dad said, 6 weeks. And I'm like, oh my God, 6 weeks of, because there's a lot of things that can happen, but they were hoping they would come back out of it whole. And it's not my decision, and I wasn't going to say anything, and I didn't say anything. But those are the kind of decisions, do you want to be given an appetite stimulant? Do you want to be given any sort of medications? DNR, a do not resuscitate, which should be on an orange piece of paper signed by the doctor. It has to be signed by the doctor. That basically says to anybody who comes into the house and discovers you on the floor, do you want to be resuscitated? The orange paper says do not resuscitate. Otherwise, and I've heard this happen, where the person had a DNR paperwork, but it was in a folder somewhere and it wasn't posted anywhere. And the firefighters are obligated to resuscitate you if they find you, not moving on the floor. So that person's wishes were not to be resuscitated, but they went against his wishes because they didn't know that there was a do not resuscitate paperwork. So again, these are small conversations. I would never have any of these conversations last more than 45 minutes. I'm actually a big fan of just kind of dropping the conversation. And if you have an article from AARP, which is really easy to find online, let alone in the magazine, just make a copy of it and drop it off. My dad used to mail me stuff, so I mail him stuff back. And, say, hey, you know what? We should probably have a conversation about this. And I will tell you, the AARP site has so many really helpful conversation starter articles. by all means, get out there and find the article that you need to support your conversation and use that as your first touch, your first introduction to the conversation. So definitely, if you have to involve others, or you should involve others, so remember that family thing. Don't have this one-on-one conversation with one parent or the other and leave your siblings out. Because ultimately, sometimes family dynamics require that you leave certain family members out. However, making sure everybody feels included, that you've had the conversation. Maybe they're not privy to what the conversation was, but it's like, we have everything in place now, that's, we're all good and we don't have to worry about it. So again, you have to use your judgment on who you involve in that conversation. So one of the things that, as we wrap up and start to field questions, it's important that you have a care team. I call it the care ecosystem, where you've got your medical team, you've got your friends and neighbors that are out there. You've got, if you're still working or you're volunteering, there's others out there who care about you and your well-being. And then, of course, there's community resources. In addition to that, I would add a circle outside of that, that's your financial advisor, your estate attorney, any sort of other professionals that you involve in your life to be outside of that, because the family's in the middle and everybody on the outside circles is all working with everyone else. Nobody should be working in silos. This is about supporting the family in how they progress. So here are some resources from the Alzheimer's Association. So alz.org is the website. There's a ton of information out there, and some of it includes the Navigator program, the Community Resource Finder, so you can find who there is out there to support you in your specific community. Alzheimer's Connected, there's research, there's articles on how do you make your home safer. Remember I mentioned that woman who, would fall and trip and broke her hip. Well, that the first thing they're going to say is pick up all the area rugs, because how many times have any of us caught our foot on the edge and caught ourselves? Well, as we get older, our reaction time slows down. And so there's that risk that you are going to end up on the floor, and the older we get, the more brittle we get, unless we're doing the right things with nutrition and hydration and potentially supplements. So we need to go look at the safety center and look at the advice and recommendations that are there. They do have a 24/7 helpline. So if, say, you do have a dementia care coach and they have business hours, right? Where you can text or email them, but they might not be responsive. And it's 2 a.m. and your loved one is walking down the street. Now, this would only happen in mid to late stages, walking down the street, taking the dog for a walk. And the police call you and say, is this your person? And you say, yes, it's my person. And then you escort them back home. But that's a good time to call that helpline, 1-800-272-3900, really easy to remember, and call and say, oh my gosh, I have no idea what to do to make sure this doesn't happen again. And they will at least give you some resources. And, it's good to have somebody to talk with about this. Honestly, I firmly believe that maybe going to support groups is a good thing to do. You can find them in alz.org, find us. And if that's your thing, that's great. It wasn't my thing. I'm more of a one-on-one type person. So, find someone that, not a friend, not a neighbor, because you will wear out those relationships. Remember what I said, that there's dementia signs. So there's years there. And then after diagnosis, the anticipated lifespan is 4 to 8 years. Mom went for 8. So that was our 14-year journey. You need to talk with professionals who have lived this journey, have worked with other family members who have been through this journey. And that's why the Alzheimer's Association really exists, is to do research, to be proactive about how maybe we can mitigate the impact of this disease. And then the other half of it really is, how do we help people who are worried and concerned and caring for these loved ones who do have this diagnosis. And then, of course, you can go to some of the online education programs, training.alz.org. And so the last and most important thing is, please don't try to do this alone. There's no reason why you should do it alone. I always talk about, I've got this syndrome and I suffer from it. I'm just saying, I'm trying to recover from that disease. But it's easy for us to say, I've got this. How different could it be from a stroke or cancer? Well, the person is cognitively capable in both of those situations. In this situation, they're really struggling. They're struggling to process information and function on a daily basis. So we have to come in with kindness and compassion and empathy and help them. And that is what a care team is for, so that everyone has the ability to support each other. Support is not a bad word. Help is not a bad word. And we need to rebuild our communities and the way that we interact and support each other so that we can all age gracefully. So that is the end of that. I will stop sharing my screen and we'll start taking questions.
Pam, first of all, on behalf of everyone, thank you so much for this presentation.
My pleasure.
Mayanne, if you can come off mute too, I think you've been kind of probably logging what questions there are. One that I'll ask while Mayanne's queuing them up is that Ronald Carl Dennis, not me, Ron, another Ron, very strong name, I might ask.
Oh, absolutely.
He had an interesting question because the focus of your presentation is on the loved one of someone diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And he's asking, what do you do when you're the patient?
It's a great question. So where the best advice I can give when you're in that situation is to realize that the people around you are trying to help you and they're trying to do their best. But sometimes it's not going to sound like that. It's going to sound like they're trying to manipulate you or change the way that you want to live your life. I think the most important thing is, especially if you're in early stages or mild cognitive impairment, is to write all this stuff down. What is it you want? What is acceptable to you and what is not acceptable to you? And write that down and then share it with, and keep it available. Make copies of it. And send it to your family, or if you don't have family, like, I will probably be pretty much on my own. I have a close friend who's my primary for healthcare power of attorney and durable power of attorney. And she knows exactly what I do and I don't want, and she has known that for years. And there's no reason to not share that information. To ensure that everyone understands what's acceptable and not acceptable. That applies to how they speak to you. That applies to the conversations that what decisions you've made. So for instance, it's like, look, here's at this point, let's say, notice scratches on my car. I've been in one accident and I had a few near misses. That's when you need to tell me it's time for us to find a different way for you to get around town. We're going to, sell the car and put that money away for any additional care needs you have later. But it's time. And so you decide what the criteria are. You put them in writing now so that people can do what you want them to and to support you the way you want to be supported. Hopefully that answered Ron's question.
Well, Ronald, be sure to let us know if you want to follow up to that. And people, if you want to, can come off mute. Mayanne, what's up next?
One of our attendees this morning, her name is Della. She actually had to leave early, but she thought some of the things that she's experienced might help others. So she's kind of pinged in throughout your presentation, Pam. So I'm just going to take Della's, the three that she's put in. So she suggested a smile, eye contact, and happiness go a long way with your loved one. She said when she noticed her father-in-law in decline, who is a very intelligent person, She was sitting next to him when he was trying to figure out the tip amount at a restaurant. He was not able to figure it out and do simple math. She had to help him. And Della's last comment, she said she wanted to share that it was very difficult for her grandma to take a shower. She was scared and screamed in the shower, and she would tell caregivers that she'd already taken a shower when she had not. Hygiene was very difficult. So those are Della's, and then we'll give you a chance to, oh, she had one more, I apologize. She doesn't know exactly what the most form is, MOST, but a doctor told her to look it up online and put it on the fridge. So that's all of Della's comments. So I'll stop there.
And she brings up some great points. Showering is a big deal. And I always like to say that with showering, first of all, they only need to shower twice a week. A lot of I had one husband who wanted his wife to take a shower every day, and he said she resists and she screams at me. And I said, okay, so obviously if you scream at something, it's scary to you. Okay, so let's admit why that's happening. I said, secondly, why are you making her take a shower every day? And I said, you know, first of all, the water spraying at you, especially, you know, if your person is mid-stage or later, you know, they're going to struggle with why that's happening. The mechanics of things and how they work, it's your brain is failing to understand this. So the easiest thing to do is to put a washcloth and some soap out and, you know, soap up the washcloth for them. And then, you know, if you need to, you know, do the show, don't tell. I'm a big fan of show, don't tell, because it's harder for them to audibly be able to process information. But if they can visually look at you and audibly you can instruct to say, we need to wash your armpits, mom, and she will mimic. That's one of the behaviors of Alzheimer's. So boy, we're getting a lot of questions here. Yes, it does, Lanny. My book does talk about the different types of dementia, but just so you guys know, there's over 100 different types. Yay, right? But the key one, 70% of people do have are diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Vascular dementia is number 2, and that's usually because someone has had high blood pressure for an extended period of time, like my dad did, high cholesterol, which my dad also had, and my mom had high cholesterol. And they weren't really exercisers prior to discovering they had those things, so they became exercisers. And I think that's one of the reasons they lived as long as they did. So yeah, and then frontotemporal, they're now calling it dysfunction versus dementia. And that's a kind of the brain injury type of dementia, where it is a result of brain injury. And then there's several other types, but you can have mixed dementia. So you could have vascular dementia and Alzheimer's. So the key here is to look at the symptoms. What are the symptoms? And then how can you help the individual function despite the symptoms? We're trying to give them a better quality of life and give you a better quality of life. Because if you're constantly caring for them, you're not caring for yourself, and making sure that you regain your quality of life while helping this individual and supporting them, that's really important. We don't want to run your health into the ground in the process. So, so the whole showering thing that addresses that particular situation. The tip, I know people that are 25 years old that can't calculate a tip. Because people are trying to do it the hard way. A lot of restaurants already calculate it for you these days, and they do that because most of us can't do math. So I wouldn't use that as a judgment necessarily. And one thing to share, you mentioned that she said intelligent. Intelligence has nothing to do with dementia. Being an instructor or being a college professor or being a rocket scientist does not preclude you from getting dementia. So it's not about intelligence. And my mom didn't lose her intelligence as a result of dementia. If anything, that has to be even more frustrating, is that she just couldn't respond. There's a veil where information comes in and the brain just can't process it. But she was still in there as a person, and her personality was still there. So we have to keep that in mind, that it has nothing to do with intelligence.
I think in Della's context, she had brought that up to say it was a task that her father-in-law had formerly been able to do quite easily, and suddenly was one he was struggling with. Not
Yeah, gotcha.
not to say that because somebody's intelligent, they either would or wouldn't be more apt to be
Well, I want to
diagnosed.
make sure that, yeah, exactly.
Right,
And that's good clarification. Thanks, Ron.
Yeah.
There's one, I'm sorry, Ron, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Maya.
I was just gonna say there was one other question from Lanny earlier, and it is, what are 3 brain health tests that can be done? And I think you might have addressed it in your presentation, or that information is also in your book.
Both, but the 2 that are most popular, there's lots of tests out there, but these are the 2 that tend to be the 2 that a primary care physician would administer and a neurologist would administer, and that is the mini memory state exam. They call it the MMSE, MMSE. And that one is very task-based, and it's a great benchmark. It's based on scores, and I go through that in my book, what scores mean what. But the whole purpose behind it is to see if you start off at one level and you drop over time, right? And how fast you're dropping. What are the things that you're struggling with? So to me, that type of exam is really helpful for seeing where the person's going to need the most support. This isn't about categorizing someone into early stage, mid stage, or late stage necessarily. It's really to say, how can I support them better based on where they're struggling with the mini memory state exam. The other one, which is different, so you can take both, in other words, is the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. So if everybody's writing that down, and it is abbreviated capital M, small o for Montreal, capital C, A. So it's called the MoCA test. Also, I've talked about that in my book. So those 2 exams, and then for a, honestly, I would not ever say that there's such a thing as a definitive diagnosis. I think a lot of the diagnoses are combinations of things. So you get your test exams, your scores for those. You get an MRI and they identify where activity in the brain is actually happening or not happening. Are there dark spots? Is there significant shrinkage? So an MRI is all part of that as well. Those are the 3 things that I would say help you understand where either you or your loved one are at cognitively. There's also brainwave tests and a couple of other things, but to me, if that's the short list, if you want the short list.
And Mary Fulton brought up a very interesting question, which I suspect occurs quite commonly when you've gotten somebody's agreement and reaction that's favorable to let's stop driving, or to whatever financial commitments need to be made. What do you do if that person has reacted favorably but then doesn't remember having had the conversation or having had that reaction to favorably go forward?
Oh, Mary, thank you for bringing that up, because it is a very common problem. And the thing that you have to, how you have to approach this is, it's one of the reasons why I suggest having multiple conversations, is because you're kind of prepping their brain. It's also a perfect reason to have these conversations way before you're in that situation, right? Because once you're trying to have a conversation with someone who's at mid-stage, you're going to get asked the same questions. You're going to get that resistance. I never said that. I don't know what you're talking about. So when I say sooner is smarter, it's these stories that I'm referring to of we've waited too long to make this an easy process. So, okay, what do you do with that? All right, we waited too long. That's a bummer. What do we do about it? So then it comes down to your patient's level. And, there's some documents, once a person's diagnosed with dementia, then the estate attorney has to kind of do an assessment. Is this person understanding a legal document? And there can come a point where that person's no longer allowed to sign a document. Another reason why sooner is smarter, because if you don't have these documents in place and your loved one can no longer process what they're signing, the estate attorney cannot validate their decisions. So if they said, you know, hey, this is what I want for my advance directive, this is how I want to be cared for in a hospital, this is who I want to have care for me, and they don't have a clue what you're talking about or can't remember it, then the estate attorney can't finish the documentation process. So it's really important to do this sooner than later. Sad to say, but that's the case.
Thank you. I am not seeing any other questions. Mayanne, are we you seeing something I'm missing?
No, I think we've captured everything in the chat so far. So I don't see anything else.
Great.
So if you guys need more information or want to hear more about my journey, you can find my book on Amazon. It's not that simple, Helping Families Navigate the Alzheimer's Journey. And that's where you'll see some of I have a chapter called The Emotional Roller Coaster. But I also talk about documents, I talk about medications, I talk about stages, and then the anecdote of our story, along with possible wording for starting these conversations, either with your loved one or preparing to let your loved ones know what you want and what your wishes are, or how to have difficult, sibling conversations, because that can happen too.
Well, great. With no more questions and with this nice wrap up, Pam, thank you so much for your time and for making this presentation today. I think on behalf of everybody here, it's very helpful information and important, and more increasingly important as we are all aging and getting older. We're bound to be around and have loved ones who experience problems.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity. Remember, alz.org, Alzheimer's Association, has a ton of information on their website. If you're a researcher or you're looking for a way to start a conversation, there's a lot of tools on that site. So thank you, AARP. And by the way, make sure that you read that AARP magazine that you received, because they've got, as I said, lots of great articles, and then their website has even more resources. So between those two, it's a good start. And then if you have individual questions, we have resources to help you too.